Well, many influential people have been tagging both me and Dave Smith over the past few days, demanding to know why our apparent wicked anti-Israel bias has prevented us from discussing the Druze in Syria. So I thought we could address that head on. Dave Smith was supposed to be debating Gloria Eland on that issue and others, but Gloria has just decided he is otherwise engaged, perhaps after listening to the last part of this debate. Well, Dave Smith, host of Part of the Problem, has not disappeared. He's remained with me. Thank you, Dave, for sticking with the programme. Yeah, I'm sorry that your fellow debater has done a runner, but he obviously didn't like what he was hearing.
Piers Morgan hosts Dave Smith in a solo round after Dave's opponent goes to debate. What unfolds? A blistering takedown of regime change, Israel's bombing campaigns, and the catastrophic legacy of Western intervention, and the Epstein files cover-up that reeks of DC rot. This isn't your average discussion. This is a masterclass in ripping the mask off hypocrisy. Let's break it all down and expose the games being played. Spoiler alert, Dave dominates.
Well, I'll take it. I'll win this one by default.
Let's just talk first of all about this situation with the Druze in Syria. You know, I've been accused of not saying anything. There was a post today of an apparent Druze being executed in cold blood. I said it was absolutely horrific. I think anyone being executed in cold blood, it's a horror story. What is your take on what is happening there? Is Israel justified in defending the Druze in Syria?
Oh, absolutely not. And I don't believe for a second that they are defending the Druze in Syria. I mean, to me, it seems, especially, just think about the conversation you were just having. We're supposed to believe now that the Israelis are just so, I saw, who was it? It was one of the neocons I saw tweeting the other day, goes, I've just seen the footage of the Druze being killed and it's just heartbreaking to see. Like, we're really supposed to believe that that's what's motivating them, yet we've seen 1,000 times more footage coming right next door in Gaza, and that hasn't motivated them to stop. But the crazy thing, as you pointed out, that I've been tagged by so many of these Israel defenders is that, look, I hate the term whataboutism. I hate when people use it. I think it gets used incorrectly, and it gets used to stifle people putting things into context often. But this, first of all, really does seem like an example of just being like, well, you're concerned with the people dying here. How come you're not talking about the people dying there, which is not a legitimate defense? It would be like telling someone to stop doing archaeology because we need, what about cancer research? Well, okay, we can all specialize and focus on different things. But specifically in the case of Syria, it's so outrageous because, as you well know, Piers, I mean, it was for many years, going all the way back to 2011, it was the policy of Israel, the United States of America, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey to attempt to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. And they had a years-long campaign. I mean, the Saudis sent suicide bombers in. The United States of America poured billions of dollars into the conflict, well past the point where they knew it was getting into the hands of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And they lied about the moderate rebels. But even Barack Obama at the time had admitted that the idea that there was some moderate rebel fighting force that was going to get in between Bashar al-Assad's army and ISIS and conquer both of them was ridiculous. Now, as you know the history, Russia came in, Putin intervened, and kind of prevented that regime change for a while, and then ultimately they got it. But Israel was bragging, Netanyahu himself was bragging after Bashar al-Assad was overthrown, or after he fled, that Israel had paved the way for this situation. So myself and many other people in the non-interventionist libertarian camp had been screaming now for nearly 15 years that this will be a catastrophe. As bad as Bashar al-Assad may be, it was obvious who was going to take power if this vacuum was created. And of course, Jelani moved in, and now we have Al-Qaeda essentially in charge of Syria. And very predictably, this is a bad situation for the Christians and the Druze and other minorities in the country who were, let's say, reasonably protected historically under Assad by regional standards. And so, yeah, it's terrible what's happening there. I don't believe that the motivating factor for Israel bombing them is the protection of the innocent civilians. And I think that this is kind of further evidence that the quest for regime change in Syria was an unwise policy to pursue.
I mean, you could look back in the whole century at regime change, in Libya, in Iraq, everywhere. And incredibly unpalatable though it may seem, it's very rarely can you point to any of it that's ever actually worked, for the reasons we may now be seeing in Syria. It all sounds good, but actually, where's it worked?
Exactly. Tell me one regime change that didn't end in bloodshed, collapse, or terrorists taking over. Iraq, disaster. Libya, chaos. Syria, hellhole. Afghanistan, total embarrassment. The only success stories are from World War II, and even then, you had to nuke civilians to pull it off. Regime change, it's elite code for destabilize, loot, and bounce.
Well, I mean, look, the examples that people would point to would be Germany and Japan as historically, and look, to be completely fair here to the other side, I mean, those are pretty remarkable examples. I remember I read Henry Kissinger's book, World Order, which, by the way, try reading a Henry Kissinger book without hearing it in Henry Kissinger's voice in your mind. It's an impossible challenge. But he says in the opening of the book, he says that the greatest US president ever was Truman. And now, while I disagree with his assessment on this, but you could see from Kissinger's point of view, he goes, look, the greatest achievement ever by an American president was to defeat Germany and Japan and then bring them back into the world order. And however you feel about that, that is a pretty remarkable achievement. But let's not kid ourselves. What did it take in order to do that?
But also, let me rephrase my statement. I wasn't talking that far back in history. I'm talking about since the Arab Spring. And all the uprisings there, because I've been on CNN for like a month when that was going on, and I just remember it all. I remember everyone feeling like, well, this is going to be great for all these countries.
Yes.
And actually,
people got swept up in it.
And the hard reality is that it sounds great, but the reality often is it just creates mayhem.
Yes. But so anyway, the point I was making is that you have to go that far back into history. We had to go to total war against the civilian population and take innocent civilian life in staggering numbers like we have never happened before in the history of the world. But also, you'd even have to ignore the precursor to World War II, which was World War I, when Woodrow Wilson said, we're going to make the world safe for democracy. And the world certainly wasn't safe for democracy at the time. It was monarchs who ruled all of Europe. But when those monarchs were overthrown, what rose up was Lenin and Stalin and Adolf Hitler. And so even before those examples, we should have gone in knowing that regime change is a very risky game. And of course, to your point, the entire run of regime changes post 9/11 and those, starting before the Arab Spring, but through it and after it, every last one of them has been a catastrophe. And so this is one of the things I was warning about a few weeks back when Donald Trump was talking about regime change, and a lot of the war hawks were advocating for it in Iran. And they're trying to convince you, Piers, that the son of the Shah is going to walk in and take over, and it's going to be liberal 70s Iran again. But there's simply no guarantee of that. And much like we're seeing now in Syria, we saw in Libya, we saw in Egypt, we saw in Yemen, we saw in Afghanistan, and we saw in Iraq. And these regime changes led to a far worse catastrophe than we had before them.
Do you think there should be regime change in Israel?
Well, I mean, I certainly wouldn't advocate a regime change war there because I've all the points I just made, and I've seen how that worked. But in terms of there's lots of countries in the world I'd like to see the regime change. I'd love to see a regime change in North Korea and in Iran too, just not one that was imposed by outside force. And so certainly I meant a
kind of organic one where Netanyahu's been delaying having an election. If there was an election, it just seems completely baffling to me that a majority of Israelis, and the polls suggest this is not the case, that they're not utterly repulsed by what is being done in their name now in Gaza. You could easily construct, as I have done, a defense of what the Israeli government did to dismantle Hezbollah. Incredibly surgical, extremely successful from a military perspective, very little civilian casualties. You could just say that was an exemplar attack against a terror group, which was very successful. Similarly, I would defend their right to do what they did in Iran. I think you feel differently, but other people, take sides either way. But again, it was pretty surgical. There wasn't much civilian loss of life as it went on. It clearly did have a big dismantling effect on a lot of Iran's ability, perhaps, to progress to nuclear weapons. So you can see the logic here, but I see no logic whatsoever for this indiscriminate carnage. Now, in Gaza, or where it's leading, other than exactly where Smodrich said 3-4 weeks ago it was leading, which is the expulsion of all Palestinians, which would be just a clear example of a ethnic cleansing war crime.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And look, I mean, we may disagree a little bit about the Iranian situation, but there's no question, right? The one in Gaza is the one that's just totally indefensible. I mean, when you think about it, it was, if I do my math right here, it was 19 months ago that South Africa brought their genocide case to the International Court of Justice, and the court ruled that it was plausibly a genocide then. And now, almost over a year and a half later, we're sitting here and the IDF is shooting at starving people as they're desperately trying to get a tiny bit of food. They're setting up a concentration camp, and they're openly talking about ethnic cleansing. They can call it relocation or transfer, but this is just pathetic euphemisms at this point. And so to be this a year and a half plus after they were credibly accused of genocide, I mean, this is indefensible. And I completely agree with you, Piers. It's shocking that the Israeli people, who I do not, through all this time, I have never once condemned the people of Israel. I always keep it to their government and the neoconservatives and the war hawks. But I am shocked, because there are good people in Israel, and it's shocking that they're not like morally appalled by this, particularly given the history that us Jews have and how connected to that so many Jewish people are, that they'd be on the other side of this genocide. But then on top of that, I'm almost more baffled by their own instincts for self-preservation, that they don't simply read the room and go, we cannot get away with this. Even if we can get away with this politically in the moment, which they might be able to, they have turned global opinion against them, particularly with the younger generation, in a way that simply will never be reversed. Their only course to reverse that would be that organic regime change that me and you were just talking about, would be for the Israeli people to stand up and say, hey, we've had enough, and we simply will not support our government as they do this. And the fact that they don't see the writing on the walls, there's that line from the Simon and Garfunkel song where they say, how does it go? The words of the prophets are written on the subway walls and tenement halls. There's, look at that, Piers. You're probably more connected to like the internet culture and the signals of the new media than anybody else. Look at the writing on the walls all around you. Israel will never be thought of the way that people in your generation and my generation thought of this when we were young. The victims of the Holocaust who went and set up their own state for their own independence.
That's the dagger. The legacy shattering right there. Israel went from Holocaust survivors to being accused of genocide. The younger generations aren't buying the old narrative anymore. Global opinion is shifting, and fast. Then they close with the Epstein blackout, and it's full swamp mode. The House shuts down to block a vote. That's not partisan, that's straight up protection racket energy. Dave calls out the grifters who milked the scandal, then disappeared when names started getting too close to home.
The Israelis will now forever be known as the group that inflicted a Holocaust on these poor, trapped people next to them. And I can't believe more of them aren't standing up against it just for their own self-interest.
No, and what concerns me is what Israeli people may be hearing and seeing on their media. It's a bit like in Russia. I'm told by people in Russia, it's just a constant diet of extremely pro-Russian propaganda gets pumped out morning, noon, and night. And that's really what the people hear. And I wonder whether there's a very insular thing going on in Israel with the media too, where it's very difficult if you're not minded to do it, to actively go and seek it, to hear or see anything different on your local Israeli media. I've heard it's incredibly like one-sided and relentless.
I mean, I'm sure there's some truth to that, but I got to say, I mean, I could prosecute an entire case against the Israeli government just using Haaretz and the Times of Israel and the Jerusalem Post.
That's true,
so it's like, it's not like they don't have access to this information. I mean, that piece I believe it was titled "A Killing Field" in Haaretz last month, where they got IDF soldiers on the record admitting that they were given, or at least one on the record and a bunch off the record, admitting that they were given orders to shoot at the people desperately trying to get food. And the Israeli government denied the orders were given, and they disputed the number, but they didn't dispute that it was IDF shooting at them.
No.
So that excuse, I don't think the Israeli people have that excuse anymore. They also have the internet there, which I don't think is exactly the same as the Russian situation. So they're, I don't know. I'd like to give them an excuse, but I think they do have access to this information.
Just finally, David, let's just talk about the Epstein scandal. It strikes me, whatever you think of it, for the House Speaker, and this has happened just as we were about to chat, Mike Johnson has sent the House into early recess, shutting until September to block a vote calling for the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files. He says it's because Democrats are playing political games. All other votes cancelled in order to prevent the vote on Epstein. I mean, this is kind of dictator stuff, isn't it? I mean, to block a vote, not just one Democratic vote, but to make sure a note of others just don't happen either, because you want to, dampen down a raging scandal and not be aware that by doing this almost unprecedented action, you're actually just going to pour fuel onto the flames of the scandal. So it's entirely self-defeating, I think. What's your view?
I completely agree. I mean, I've been shocked by the administration's handling of this. Not so much shocked by the fact that they're not giving us all the evidence or that they want to try to bury this, but simply just the way they've gone about doing this, and that they didn't it seems like they didn't even sit down and have a little powwow and go, okay, so what's our angle here? I mean, Donald Trump himself, who really, if nothing else, is the master at selling, selling in general, selling himself, selling his political program, deflecting criticism off him. But, when he started it off by saying, you're asking me this when there's a storm in Texas, and, it was like, it was out of a cartoon or something. And the fact is, right, I think this is the thing. Okay, two things nobody can get away from here. Number one, the real problem they have is that anybody who even spent 5 seconds looking at the Jeffrey Epstein story knows that it stinks to high holy heaven. There is something going on here. You just cannot explain all of these coincidences between his rise to prominence, his rise to wealth, his connections to all these people, getting a sweetheart deal, the cameras going out, having Ehud Barak sleeping at his place. We're going to need some type of explanation here. And it can't just be, oh, nothing happened. And then number two, even if you could sell everybody on nothing really happened here, there was no blackmail, there was no intelligence connection, it's just Jeffrey Epstein. Well, then if that's the case, can someone explain to me how Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and Dan Bongino don't all have to resign in disgrace? Because you stoked the flames of this thing for years. I mean, not only Kash and Dan enriched themselves by stoking the flames of this and promising to get to the bottom of it. Pam Bondi put on that ridiculous stunt where she brought all these right-wing influencers in and said it was volume 1, implying there was much more to come, and then had just tricked all of them and given them stuff that was already in the public record. So even if it's true that there's no there, which I am not buying at all, you're all still implicated for hyping up this thing that I guess you were doing on completely false pretenses.
Yeah, there's an old desert saying, if you take a thirsty camel to the edge of an oasis, you have to give it a drink. I think they forgot. I think they forgot the drink part here, because I had Alina Haber on the show, ramping it up like nobody's business. A clip that's gone massively viral. I'm not surprised. I mean, she was saying this incredibly serious, and it's going to have all these names. It's going to be, and then it all just gets mysteriously shut down. And as I keep telling people, it gets shut down about 2 weeks after Elon Musk does his bombshell, Donald Trump's in the files. You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to think it's all a bit weird. Anyway, Dave Smith, as always, brilliant. I'm sorry that your opponent bailed, but may say a lot about him, not you. So thank you for joining me again.
Well, thank you. This was a cool change of pace to just have us
my
talk.
message to everyone who's pitched against you in a debate on Uncensored: if you do bail, I'll just use all the time to talk to Dave on his own, which I'm sure he'll be more than happy about.
Good deal. I agree.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Piers.
If you enjoyed our take on this, hit that like and subscribe for future opinions. No fluff, just raw takes and real breakdowns.